What would you do if an HOA you never joined slapped a $250,000 fine on your grandfather's ranch? When I came back to Wyoming, the last thing I expected was a $250,000 HOA fine hanging on my gate from a neighborhood I'd never even heard of. But then the truth peeled back. Shifted boundaries, homes built on my land, and an entire subdivision running on water my family controlled. That's when I realized this wasn't about fines. It was a fight they thought I'd walk away from. The first thing that hit me wasn't the Wyoming wind or the smell of sagebrush. It was the silence. After 10 years in cities, traffic noise, sirens, neighbors' music bleeding through thin walls, the quiet around my grandfather's ranch felt almost wrong. Just wind hissing through the dry grass, a creak from the old wooden gate, and the gravel popping under my truck tires as I rolled to a stop. The Mercer place looked smaller than it did in my childhood memories. The white fences that used to seem endless now just bordered a tired gravel drive and a cluster of weathered buildings. The barn's red paint had faded to a dull rust. The farmhouse roof sagged a little more than I remembered. Up the hill, the small earthen dam cut across the draw, holding back the narrow ribbon of water that fed the lower pastures. I killed the engine and just sat there a moment, hands on the steering wheel, feeling the weight of the past 6 months pressing on my chest. Laid off from my water infrastructure firm. Severance gone in a blink. Seattle rent swallowing savings. Then the phone call from a lawyer I'd never met, telling me my grandfather had passed and left me 120 acres of Wyoming dirt. Some inheritance, I muttered, even as my throat tightened. The wind tugged at a scrap of paper on the fence post in front of my truck. It flapped and snapped, white against the gray wood. That's when I saw the envelope. It was taped to the main gate, just above the old Mercer Ranch, no hunting sign my grandfather painted himself. Thick ivory paper, the kind you'd use for a wedding invitation, not for a ranch gate in the middle of nowhere. Across the front, in bold block letters, was a stamp. Silver Creek HOA, urgent. I frowned. That can't be right. I stepped out of the truck, boots crunching on gravel, and the high country air hit me. Dust, sun-warmed pine from the ridge behind the house, the faint tang of water from the dam. For half a heartbeat, it felt like I was 10 again, hopping out of Grandpa's old Ford to chase grasshoppers in the ditch. Then the present rushed back in. I tugged the envelope free. The tape ripped a strip of old white paint off the gate. Inside was a packet. 8, maybe 9 pages, printed in dense legal English. At the top, Silver Creek Homeowners Association, in a logo that tried very hard to look classy. Below that, the words that made my stomach drop. Notice of outstanding fines, $250,000 due. I read the number twice, like it might change if I blinked hard enough. The itemized list underneath looked like a parody. Failure to maintain property to community standards. Unauthorized livestock structures within residential view corridor. Non-compliant fencing materials. Unauthorized water retention structure. Accrued legal and administrative fees. I laughed once, a sharp, humorless bark that startled a magpie off the fence. This is a joke, I said out loud, because saying it made it feel less like my reality. There's no HOA out here. Grandpa's place sat 3 miles outside the small town limits. When I was a kid, the nearest neighbor was half a mile up the road. The idea of a homeowners association trying to regulate his pasture fences would have sent him into a full-blown rant about suburban nonsense. Yet there it was, $250,000 due within 30 days. Threat of lien and foreclosure proceedings as provided under Silver Creek covenants and applicable state law. My palms started to sweat. Student loans, sure. A car payment. I understood debt. But this was different. This was some faceless board claiming they could reach across time and space and slap a price tag on my grandfather's land. My grandfather's land. My land now, apparently. A gust of wind pushed dust across the road, and that's when I saw them. Two shiny SUVs eased up the county road, moving way too slowly for anyone just passing through. They turned onto my dirt drive like they owned it. One was a white luxury model with chrome so polished it flashed in the sun. The other was a dark blue one with a magnetic seal on the door. Silver Creek HOA. Compliance. Of course, I muttered. The white SUV pulled up just short of the gate, nose to nose with my old pickup. The engine cut off, and for a second, all I could hear was the ticking of hot metal cooling in the breeze. The driver's side door opened, and a woman stepped out in heels that had no business on gravel. Late 40s, maybe early 50s. Her blonde hair cut in a salon-perfect bob that didn't move in the wind. She wore a red polo shirt tucked into pressed slacks, a silver name badge glinting on her chest. She looked at the farmhouse, then at the barn, then down at the envelope still in my hand, and curled her lip like she'd just smelled something foul. "You must be Colton Mercer," she said. Her voice was smooth, trained, the kind you heard in real estate commercials and school board meetings. "Cole," I corrected automatically. "Who are you?" She stepped closer, careful not to scuff her heels in a poo hole, and extended a manicured hand as if we were at some country club mixer instead of standing in front of a chipped ranch gate. "Bethany Caldwell. I'm the president of the Silver Creek Homeowners Association and managing partner for Silver Creek Development Group." Her handshake was firm, all performance. "I was wondering when you'd bother to show up." I didn't take her hand. I held up the packet instead. "This some kind of prank? Because you've got the wrong address. This ranch isn't part of any HOA." Something in her eyes hardened. She let her hand drop and folded her arms, clutching a leather folder against her chest like a shield. "Mr. Mercer, Silver Creek is the master-planned community that now surrounds this parcel." She gestured vaguely toward the horizon. Only then did I notice, beyond the rise of my own fields, a line of bright rooftops and the skeleton of a crane scraping the sky. "Your late grandfather's property is within our sphere of influence and subject to certain community standards." "Sphere of influence?" I repeated. "This isn't a coffee shop franchise. This is a deeded ranch. It was here long before your pretty little rooftops." Her smile tightened, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Regardless of your personal feelings, the violations have been accruing for several years. Fences in disrepair, unapproved livestock enclosures visible from community roads, an illegal dam upstream that creates liability for Silver Creek homeowners. We've been more than patient." "Illegal dam?" I turned, looking up toward the earthen wall above the pastures. Sunlight flashed off the trickle of water spilling over the spillway. "That dam was built with county approval before I was born." She shrugged, a precise little movement. "Permits lapse, regulations change, communities progress. If your grandfather had chosen to cooperate, this could have been resolved amicably. Instead, he ignored repeated notices. Now the amount is what it is." $250,000? I asked. "For a man who never signed anything with you, never bought a house from you, and never agreed to your rules?" The woman from the second SUV, a younger brunette in a navy polo with compliance officer stitched on it, stepped up to stand just behind Bethany's shoulder, a clipboard in her hands. "Refusal to comply can result in the association placing a lien on your property," she recited, "which, upon continued non-payment, may lead to foreclosure proceedings. We strongly encourage you to work with us, Mr. Mercer." The air felt thinner suddenly, the big Wyoming sky closing in. "So that's it?" I said slowly. "You build some houses over my fence line, move in a bunch of people, and now you're telling me my grandfather's ranch belongs to your HOA?" Bethany's gaze flicked to the white fence and the faded "no hunting" sign, then back to me. Her eyes were cool, calculating. No one is saying the ranch belongs to us, she replied. Not yet. But if the association is forced to protect its interests, we have legal avenues. Or, her tone softened, turning almost friendly. You could avoid all of that. Silver Creek Development has standing authority from our investors to purchase this parcel at a fair market price. You're out of work, if I'm not mistaken. This could be a fresh start for you. I felt heat rise up my neck. So she'd done research. Or had someone in town gossip it to her? You've got files on me? I asked. She smiled again, a flash of teeth. We do our due diligence, Mr. Mercer. This isn't personal. It's just business and community standards. I looked past her, at the line of new houses beyond my back pasture. Shiny vinyl siding, neat lawns, a playground, where we used to move cattle. Between them and me, the old barbed wire fence sagged where posts had tilted over the years. From this angle, it did look like the development was closer than I'd expected. Maybe much closer. A cold feeling settled in my gut. Yeah, I said quietly. Something tells me it's going to get very personal. For the first time, her smile faltered. Think it over, she said briskly, sliding a business card into the packet of fines and pushing it back toward me. You have 30 days before the next phase of enforcement. After that, the association's hands are tied. She turned and picked her way back to the SUV, already tapping something into her phone. The compliance officer gave me a rehearsed, sympathetic look and followed. Engines started, gravel crunched, and both vehicles rolled back down my drive, leaving me standing at the gate with a stack of paper in my hands and dust hanging in the air. The Wyoming silence closed in again, but it didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like the moment before a storm. I stood there at the gate, dust settling around my boots, the HOA packet heavy in my hand. The words blurred in my vision. Not from emotion, I told myself, but from the sun cutting low over the ridge. I took a long breath, the kind that tries to steady a man who's suddenly standing on ground he no longer recognizes. That's when I heard the crunch of footsteps on gravel behind me. Cole Mercer. I knew it was you. I turned and saw her, Evelyn Shaw, thin as a fence post, sharper than barbed wire, wrapped in a faded denim jacket and leaning on an old wooden cane. Her gray hair was braided the way it had been since I was a kid. As she moved closer, the wind tugged at the brim of her sun-bleached hat. I could see those HOA buzzards from my porch, she said, squinting toward the road where the SUVs had disappeared. Them circling your place again like they got no shame. Again? I repeated. You mean they were here while Grandpa was alive? Her jaw tightened. Deep lines folded around her mouth, the kind you only get from decades of sun and swallowing things that burn. That woman, Bethany whatever her last name is, been trying to get her claws on this ranch for years, came sniffing around your granddad every few months. He'd chase her off, and she'd come back with thicker paperwork each time. I looked down at the packet in my hands. Somehow it felt heavier now. She said he ignored notices, I murmured. Said the fines built up while he was here. Evelyn snorted so hard it startled a nearby meadowlark. He didn't ignore 'em, son. He threw 'em right in the stove. I watched him. Said no HOA was going to tell a Mercer how to run his land. Problem is, they just kept coming. More threats, more surveys. Folks in town saying she was pushing to redraw boundaries. Redraw boundaries? My voice came out sharper than I meant. How? Why? Evelyn leveled her gaze at me, the sort of look that made you feel suddenly 11 years old again, standing in trouble with a grown-up who could see straight through you. You really don't know, do you? Come on. She jerked her chin toward the back of the ranch. You need to see something. I fell in step beside her as she shuffled across the yard, the dry grass brushing our jeans. The air smelled like dust and sun-warmed soil. We passed the barn, its boards creaking, but stubbornly holding on like every old thing in Wyoming. The wind carried the faint trickle from the dam upstream. "Your granddad was sharp," she said quietly as we walked. "Sharp until the end. But this business with the HOA, it wore him down. Not physically at first. Up here." She tapped her temple. "He worried they were stealing pieces of his land while no one was looking." I swallowed. "He never said anything to me. He didn't want to burden you. Said you had city jobs and a city life. Didn't think you'd come back." We crested a small rise and Evelyn pointed her cane toward the horizon. I froze. There, beyond the weather-beaten fence line, rose a row of identical luxury homes, bright siding, manicured lawns, neat driveways. They stood so close to the fence that one backyard trampoline nearly touched a leaning post. A brand-new asphalt road wound behind them, where there used to be open pasture stretching to the creek. "Those weren't here when I was a kid," I said. "They weren't here 5 years ago," Evelyn replied. "Silver Creek HOA built Phase 2 right up against this property. They swore they had the land. Your granddad swore they were wrong." "And the county?" I asked. "They just let this happen?" She let out a harsh laugh. "County only sees what the surveyors give 'em. And Bethany? She hires the kind that see things her way." A cold wind lifted across my arms, raising goosebumps. I stared at the houses, at how they seemed to lean into the ranch as if staking a claim. The fence line wasn't just close. Something felt off, skewed. "How close are they supposed to be?" I asked. Evelyn tapped her cane against a sun-bleached fence post. "That right there? That's the original line. Your granddad and I pounded these posts into the ground in 1978. We followed an old county map, older than both of us back then. I remember every inch of it." I crouched, brushing my fingers over the cracked wood. Years of wind and winter storms had weathered it down, but the metal staple holding a strip of old barbed wire was still embedded, stubborn as ever. Something inside me clicked, an engineer's instinct, sharpened by years of measuring, drafting, building. "Evelyn," I said slowly, "if this is the original boundary, those houses look like they're sitting inside our line." Her eyes narrowed. "That's what I've been saying. And your granddad was trying to prove it before he passed. Said the county maps didn't match the originals anymore. Said someone moved the lines." A tightness wrapped around my chest. "Someone," I repeated, "meaning the HOA." She didn't answer, but the wind did, whistling through the tall grass in a way that felt like agreement. We stood there in silence for a long moment, staring at the gleaming homes pressed too close to the ranch fence. Kids' toys lay scattered in a backyard. A dog barked. A sprinkler turned lazily, spraying water over a lawn that shouldn't exist on this side of the ridge. "That woman's been circling like a hawk," Evelyn said finally. "Your granddad fought her off as long as he could, but he couldn't fight alone." I tightened my grip around the packet of fines. "I'm not him," I said quietly, "but I'm here now." Evelyn leaned in, lowering her voice. "Then you'd better look in his office. He kept things, notes, pictures, maybe even that old county map. If Bethany's been playing with boundaries, that's where you'll find the truth." The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the fence. The wind picked up again, louder this time, rattling the dry wire like a warning. Evelyn turned to head back toward the house. "You want to know why that woman thinks she can find a man for his own land?" she said over her shoulder. "It's 'cause she thinks she already owns half of it." I stared at the row of houses, too tidy, too new, too close, and in that moment, something inside me shifted. A spark, a fight, a sense of something stolen that I hadn't realized was mine to defend. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. I walked back toward the ranch house with Evelyn, my boots crunching through the brittle grass. Every step felt heavier, like the ground itself resisted letting me pass until I acknowledged what I had just seen. The white siding of those new homes gleamed like teeth in the lowering sun, smiling, taunting, daring me to look away. But I didn't. Inside the farmhouse, the air changed. The light dimmed through dusty windows, catching motes that floated like slow snowflakes. The place smelled like old pine boards, stale coffee, leather, and something else. Memory. Familiar, comforting, heartbreaking. I shut the door behind us, and it groaned in a way I remembered from childhood. A sound that meant, "You're safe now." Funny how the same sound now felt like a warning. "You said he kept notes," I told Evelyn. She gave a single nod. "Office is down the hall, left side. He locked most things, but I doubt the old man expected to leave this world before showing you the key." As she sank into one of the creaky kitchen chairs, I walked down the narrow hallway. The floorboards flexed under my weight, each step echoing through the quiet house. I paused outside the office door. It was half open, the dim interior lit only by the late afternoon glow slanting through a small window. I pushed it open. It was exactly how I remembered it, and nothing like I remembered it. The wooden desk sat under the window, the same scratches worn into the surface, the same old mason jar full of pens that hadn't worked since the 90s. The walls were lined with shelves full of binders, maps, envelopes containing receipts from decades ago, and a few dusty framed photos of ranch life. But there was something else now. A sense of urgency in the scattered papers, a tension in the half-open drawers, a silence that felt interrupted, as if Grandpa had been working here moments before he left this world. I swallowed hard. Focus, Cole. I stepped around the desk. Photos lay face down where they'd been hastily pushed aside. A few survey printouts were tucked between old feed invoices. I spotted the edge of a manila folder marked in his shaky handwriting. Boundary. Do not discard. My pulse kicked. I opened it and found almost nothing. A few note cards, a torn corner of a map, a stapled letter addressed to County Survey Office, stamped received, but never answered. The rest of the folder was empty. Evelyn hadn't exaggerated. Someone had been looking through this. "Check the drawers," she called from the kitchen, as if reading my mind. The top drawer held mostly receipts and old tools. The second was full of dog-eared ranch supply catalogs. The third was locked. I tugged once. Solid. I tugged twice, harder. Still locked. I sat back on my heels staring at it. The lock was old brass, scratched, the kind that would give way if you cursed at it loud enough. But something told me not to force it. Grandpa was a man of systems and finishings. If there was a locked drawer, the key existed. I looked around the room again. The shelves, the desk, the mason jar, the hook on the wall where he used to hang his hat. Where would a man like him hide a key? My eyes drifted to the framed photo on the wall, a picture of him standing in the pasture with me at age 10, my skinny legs sticking out from oversized boots. He had one arm around me, pointing toward the hills like he was showing me the whole world. The frame hung crooked. Crooked wasn't Grandpa's style. I lifted it from the nail and turned it over. Taped to the back was a rusty small key on a string. A smile broke across my face. "Clever old man," I murmured. I knelt and fitted the key into the drawer lock. It stuck for a second, then clicked open with a soft snap. Inside lay a single thick folder and a small metal box. My stomach tightened. The folder, marked Survey 1964, Original County Record, held a brittle, yellowed map. The paper was fragile, the edges curling. Across it, in ink so faded it looked like smoke, were drawn the boundaries of Mercer Ranch. Clear, straight, unmistakable. I laid it flat on the desk and gently smoothed the creases. And there it was. The northern boundary, the one beneath the new Silver Creek homes, extended much farther than the line the county and the HOA had been using. If this map was legitimate, the HOA hadn't just built close to the fence. They'd built inside the ranch. I breathed out slowly. My hands were trembling. Under the map, I found Polaroids, old fence posts, hand-chiseled stone markers half buried in grass, and the same hillside I'd walked with Evelyn. Each photo had a date and a note in Grandpa's handwriting. Marker intact. No shift. Followed by another from a more recent year. Marker? Missing? Then another. Something isn't right. Something in my chest twisted. He'd known. He'd tried to fight this. He'd tried on his own. I opened the metal box next. Inside were letters. Copies of correspondence Grandpa had mailed to the county, to survey offices, even to a state land commission. Some stamped received, some stamped insufficient documentation, others never stamped at all. One stood out. Boundary inconsistency noted between 1964 original and 2017 submitted development map. I read it twice, then sat back, feeling heat rise to my face. My breath shook in my chest. The injustice was no longer a theory. It was documented, photographed, detailed by the hand of the man who raised me. Grandpa hadn't been confused or stubborn. He'd been right. I folded my arms on the desk and bowed my head for a moment, letting the anger settle into something sharper, something useful, a clean, controlled kind of fury, the kind that engineers relied on when everything was going wrong and you had to diagnose the failure. Behind me, Evelyn spoke softly. I told him he should bring you home sooner. I turned. She stood in the doorway, cane in hand, eyes softer now. He didn't want you dragging your life down here, she said. Didn't want to be a burden. Figured he could handle it. I swallowed. Looks like he couldn't. No, she said. Not alone. The light in the office dimmed as a cloud passed over the sun, shadows stretching across the old map like dark fingers. Evelyn, I said quietly. He was digging into this, trying to prove the boundaries got moved. Why didn't he tell anyone in town? The sheriff? A lawyer? Oh, he told some, she replied. But folks here don't cross Bethany lightly. She's tied to the whole development. Money, politics, county boards. Hard to fight a woman who owns half the billboards and the ears of every official who matters. I exhaled, the frustration punching through. So what do I do now? She tapped her cane against the floor. You gather proof. You measure it. You put the truth in the hands of someone who can't be bullied or bought. Her gaze sharpened. And I know exactly the man you need. Who? Luke Harper, she said. Surveyor. Honest as the day he was born. Hard-headed. Doesn't work for corporations. Doesn't like developers. And, she gave a thin smile, he's been waiting for someone to stand up to that HOA. He just didn't know it'd be you. I looked back at the desk, at the Polaroids, at the map, at the letters my grandfather wrote with shaky hands, fighting until the end. A slow, simmering resolve filled my chest. I'll call him, I said. The truth was right here in front of me. Now I needed to prove it. The next morning broke cold and bright. The kind of Wyoming morning where the sky looks sharpened, like someone polished it overnight. Frost clung to the ranch grass, and a thin layer of ice glazed the top of the horse trough. I stepped outside with the old cordless phone pressed to my ear, breath fogging in the air as it rang. 1 ring. 2. 3. On the fourth, a gravelly voice answered. Harper. Mr. Harper. My name is Cole Mercer. Evelyn Shaw recommended you. Said you were the man to talk to about a boundary dispute. A short silence. Then a grunt. She's still alive? Very, I said, and still opinionated. He huffed. Maybe a laugh, maybe not. Hard to tell. What's the issue? He asked. I explained it in a few lines. The HOA finds, the suspicious development, the old map I found, the photographs, my grandfather's letters. Another silence. You at the Mercer place? He finally asked. Yes. I can be there in 20 minutes. The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a second, then pocketed it. That was the entire conversation. Efficient, slightly intimidating. But at least he was coming. 20 minutes later, right on schedule, a dusty green pickup turned onto the ranch drive. It looked like it had seen every back road in the state. Out stepped a tall man in his 60s, shoulders squared, beard trimmed short and white as snow. He wore a canvas jacket, sun-bleached jeans, and a belt with a surveyor's compass etched into the buckle. He gave the ranch a slow, assessing look before finally meeting my eyes. You're Cole. Yeah. I'm Luke. No handshake. No smile. Just a nod as he walked past me and through the gate like he'd been here 1,000 times. He carried 2 cases, one metal, one canvas, full of equipment I couldn't name but recognized as serious. Show me the map, he said as he stepped into the house. I spread everything out on the kitchen table. The brittle 1960s survey, the Polaroids, the boundary notes, the stamped letters. Sunlight filtered through the window, warming the wood and illuminating decades of old paper like they were relics in a museum. Luke studied each item without touching them at first. He leaned in close, tracing details with his eyes. He picked up the Polaroids, holding them at different angles to catch the light. Then he unfolded the old survey with surprising gentleness for such large, calloused hands. Original county template, he murmured, printed back when they still used carbon sheets and hand-drawn bearings. You don't see these often. So it's real? I asked. He shot me a sideways look. If someone faked this, they'd deserve a medal. He compared the drawn lines with distances in the notes, mumbling calculations under his breath. Then he placed one rough finger along the northern property line. This right here? If this line is correct, those houses up there, he jerked his head toward the ridge, are sitting on Mercer land. No question in my mind. A jolt shot through my chest. But, he added, we don't win fights on old paper. We win them with measurements. Precise, repeatable, verifiable measurements. You ready to walk? I grabbed my coat. Lead the way. We headed out to the back pasture. The light was crisp, the air cutting cold. A few hawks circled overhead, riding the updrafts. The ground, still firm from last night's frost, crunched under our boots as we climbed toward the boundary line. Luke set up a tripod near the first old fence post, one of the ones in Grandpa's Polaroids. He calibrated his equipment with a steadiness only decades in the field could teach. Every movement deliberate. Every adjustment exact. This one hasn't moved, he said. Old wood or not, the post is in the original position. He marked its GPS coordinate, scribbled something into a small notebook, then nodded for me to follow him to the next marker. For the next 2 hours, we zigzagged along the supposed northern boundary. We found the stone marker Evelyn described, half buried under weeds but still solid. We found a caved-in corner post where only the iron spike remained. We found the faint outline of a barbed wire path, long since swallowed by field grass. Luke marked everything. Each confirmed marker pushed the boundary further north. Each coordinate contradicted the HOA's development map. By late morning, we were standing on a low rise just above the backyards of several Silver Creek homes. A row of vinyl privacy fences stood 20 feet from where Luke said the original Mercer line lay. One house in particular, a large 2-story with a pergola and a fire pit, looked like it had been built directly on the Mercer side of the line. Luke whistled softly. It was the first emotional sound I'd heard him make all day. "That," he said, "is a problem for someone. And it ain't you." I exhaled slowly, staring at the house. A woman in workout clothes watered potted flowers on her deck, totally unaware that she might be standing on my land. A kid's bike lay abandoned near the fence. A dog barked twice, then trotted back toward the sliding glass door. This wasn't theoretical anymore. This wasn't paperwork. They had built homes on the Mercer Ranch. "What happens now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Luke collapsed the tripod and packed his tools. "I'll draw up a full report with coordinates, photos, and historical comparisons. Give me 24 hours, maybe less." "That fast?" He shrugged. "Man's gotta eat. And this one," he glanced at the houses again, "this job's gonna rattle some folks." As we walked back toward the house, clouds gathered over the ridge. The wind picked up, rustling through the tall grass. I felt the pressure in the air change, heavy and electric. Before he climbed into his truck, Luke paused, one boot on the running board. "Cole," he said, voice low. "I've been doing this 40 years. I've seen sloppy developers, misplaced markers, even a case where a guy moved stones in the night." He tapped the old map under his arm. "But this looks deliberate." The word settled hard in my stomach. He closed the truck door and drove off, leaving me standing in the driveway with the Wyoming wind whipping dust around my boots. Deliberate. Someone had known exactly what they were doing when they built those homes. Someone had shifted lines on purpose. Someone had buried my grandfather's complaints and hoped no one would ever follow the trail. But they hadn't counted on me coming home. And they sure hadn't counted on me fighting back. I spent the night pacing the creaky floorboards of the ranch house, Luke's words echoing in my head. Deliberate, not accident, not oversight. Deliberate. The maps lay spread across the dining table, held flat by mugs and coasters and an old branding iron I found on the mantel. Every time I looked at the neat, straight northern boundary on the 1964 survey, a fresh wave of anger rolled through me. By sunrise, I knew what I had to do. I was done reacting. It was time to confront the woman who thought she could swallow the Mercer Ranch in paperwork and pretty houses. Silver Creek's Mountain Lodge clubhouse wasn't a mountain lodge at all. It was a polished, glass-fronted monument to money, sitting on land that used to be open pasture. My grandfather and I once rode horses across that same ground. Now it hosted yoga classes and homeowners' brunches. I pulled into the parking lot just as the morning sun hit the glass facade, turning it into a blinding mirror. SUVs lined the lot, shiny, expensive, smelling of fresh plastic rather than sweat or hay. I felt out of place in my old boots and worn jacket, but I didn't care. I wasn't here for appearances. Inside, the lobby was even worse. Stone columns, a waterfall feature trickling over fake rock. A receptionist's desk made of wood polished so smooth it looked wet. Framed photos of mountain horizons hung in rows, all of them carefully edited to make the place seem more natural than it was. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, glancing up from her tablet with the kind of polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Yes," I said. "I need to speak with Bethany Caldwell." Her smile tightened. "Ms. Caldwell has a full schedule today. Do you have an appointment?" "No," she blinked. "Then I'm afraid—" "Tell her it's regarding the Mercer Ranch boundary dispute," I said, lowering my voice slightly. "And tell her, Ma, I'm the one holding the original county map." Something flickered behind her eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or fear. Without another word, she picked up the phone and whispered into it. 2 seconds later, she hung up and stood. Ms. Caldwell will see you. I followed her through a hallway lined with glossy directory plaques and softly glowing sconces. The carpet smelled like new construction, glue, and money. Then she opened a door to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Silver Creek subdivision. And there she was. Bethany sat behind a desk made of dark wood that probably weighed as much as a small horse. She wore a cream blazer today, hair perfectly styled, makeup flawless. She didn't stand when I entered, didn't even offer a nod of acknowledgement. She just looked at me with the mild, cold amusement of someone preparing to swat a fly. "Mr. Mercer?" she said lightly. "What a surprise." I shut the door behind me. "I doubt that." Her lips curled in a small smirk, but she gestured to the chair across from her. "Well then, sit. You look like you have something to show me." I sat, slowly, carefully, a little too deliberately. I placed Luke's preliminary notes on the desk and slid them forward. She didn't touch them. "What's this?" she asked, though she already knew. "Proof," I said. "Proof that your development encroaches on approximately 10 acres of my property. 14 homes, part of your clubhouse, access roads, paths. You built them on land that doesn't belong to you." She lifted one eyebrow, the picture of bored elegance. "Those are just scribbles. Anyone can draw lines on paper, Mr. Mercer." "Those lines were confirmed by an independent surveyor," I said, "hired by the county before your development even existed, and I have the original map." She gave a small laugh. "Oh, you sweet summer child." Something hot pricked at the back of my neck, but I held my expression steady. "You think you can just walk in here with some dusty relic and threaten a development of this scale?" she continued. "The county approved our plans years ago. The survey we submitted is the survey that stands. You submitted a false survey." She leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing. "You're accusing a licensed development firm of falsifying state documents?" "I'm saying the numbers don't match," I replied evenly. "And the old markers prove it." She finally reached for Luke's notes, 2 fingers, like she was picking up something dirty. She skimmed them, then dropped the papers back onto her desk. "This is nothing," she said. "A few photographs, an outdated map, and the word of a man who works out of the back of a pickup truck. His work is recognized by the county. And so is mine," she snapped. She stood now, turning her back to me as she walked to the window. Her heels clicked softly on the polished floor. She gazed out over the community like a queen surveying her kingdom. "Look at them," she said. "Homeowners who trusted my vision. Families who invested in a community that raised property values across the valley. My development supports the local economy, raises tax revenue, provides beauty and order where there once was chaos." "Pasture," I corrected. "It used to be pasture." "Aging, wasted land," she said sharply. "Land your grandfather should have sold. Land you should sell now." I stood. "I'm not selling." She turned and her smile vanished entirely. "Let me be crystal clear, Mr. Mercer. You are one man. You have no money, no legal team, no leverage. You have a pile of papers and nostalgia. I have a board, investors, and the county in my corner." "You mean you have influence?" I said. "Not the same thing." She waved a dismissive hand. "You have 30 days before enforcement begins. Fines will increase. Legal actions will escalate. In the end, you will lose this land. Better to let me buy it from you now and save yourself the humiliation." I stepped closer to her desk, planting both hands on the polished surface. "Bethany," I said quietly, "I know my grandfather, and I know this land, and I know when someone's lying to my face." Something flickered, just for a second, in her expression. Annoyance or worry? Before she could respond, I picked up Luke's notes and turned toward the door. "So here's my offer," I said, pausing. "You can pretend this is nothing. You can act like I'm just a nuisance. But I'm not going anywhere. And neither is the truth. Her voice came sharp, cold. You're making a mistake. I turned back. Maybe, but the alternative is letting you take everything my grandfather built, and I can promise you this. I met her eyes, steady and unblinking. I will not let that happen. The air in the room thickened. A silent standoff stretched between us like a taut rope. Behind her, the entire Silver Creek subdivision glittered in the sun. Pretty, perfect, unsuspecting. But I wasn't intimidated anymore. I walked out without another word, the receptionist stiffening as I passed. Outside, the air felt brighter, sharper, charged. Luke's survey, the old map, my grandfather's notes. It was all real. And now Bethany Caldwell knew I wasn't backing down. By the time I pulled into the ranch again, the Wyoming sky had turned the color of tarnished brass. The wind had picked up, sweeping long fingers of dust across the pasture. Storms out here didn't always come with rain. They sometimes came with grit that scraped the world raw. I parked by the house and stepped out, shielding my face as the wind shoved dry dirt into the air. The fence rattled. The barn door slammed against its latch. Thunder rumbled somewhere beyond the hills, too faint to promise rain, but loud enough to warn trouble was rolling in. I started toward the porch when I noticed headlights bouncing down the road. Slow, steady, familiar. A white and tan sheriff's SUV eased its way up the drive, tires crunching on gravel. For a brief moment I wondered if Bethany had already sicked the law on me for daring to challenge her. But then the door opened, and Sheriff Lawson stepped out. I hadn't seen him properly since I arrived. He looked older than I remembered, broader around the middle, slower in his movements. But his eyes were the same sharp blue I'd known as a kid. The kind that had scolded me for sneaking fireworks, then taught me how to light them safely. "Cole," he called over the wind. "Heard you were back." I met him halfway across the yard. Dust stung my eyes. My jacket snapped against my arms. "I figured I'd be seeing you sooner or later," I said. He nodded, adjusting his hat to keep it from flying off. "Got a call from Silver Creek HOA. Said there was a public nuisance issue. Thought I'd come check on things." I let out a humorless laugh. "Let me guess. They're the ones who made the complaint." "Yep, Bethany herself." He looked at me for a long second, reading my face the way only someone who'd watched you grow up could. "You kicked a hornet's nest, son." "I didn't kick anything," I replied. "They're the ones building on my land." Wind lifted a sheet of dust between us, narrowing the world to hazy silhouettes. The sheriff coughed and motioned toward the porch. "Let's get inside before this dust skins us alive." We stepped into the ranch house, closing the door behind us as the storm groaned against the frame. The silence felt thick after the wind, like stepping into a church where old things lurked in the corners. Sheriff Lawson brushed off his hat and set it on the table. His boots left a trail of dirt across the floor, but he didn't bother wiping them. Out here, nobody apologized for the land following them indoors. "I ran into Evelyn," he said, settling into one of the old wooden chairs. "She mentioned you found some documents." "That's one word for it," I replied. I laid the survey photos and the old map on the table. Luke confirmed it. 10 acres, maybe more. He studied the papers quietly, his brows lowering until they formed one hard line. "Your granddad warned me about this before he passed," he finally said. "Said the development was creeping too far north. Said the county surveys didn't look right. I told him to bring his evidence by the office so I could try to help. He never did." "He tried," I murmured. "He wrote letters. They ignored him." The sheriff sighed, rubbing a hand across his jaw. "This valley's been changing," he said. "New folks moving in. Big developers swinging money around like lassos. County commissioners want growth, tax revenue, shiny new neighborhoods. Bethany brought all that with her. Jobs, designs, promises. She has a lot of sway. Enough sway to move boundary lines? I asked. He didn't answer right away, but he didn't deny it either. Instead, he tapped a finger on the old map. You have something strong here, Cole. But Bethany isn't someone who backs down easy. She'll push, hard. Well, she already started, I said. She threatened foreclosure, implied the county would side with her. The sheriff scoffed. That woman threatens foreclosure like most folks threaten overdue library fines. But his humor faded quickly, replaced by a more serious look. There's something else, Monta, he said. Something your granddad mentioned that I didn't understand at the time. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, old, yellowed at the edges. He asked me to hold on to this until you came back. Didn't tell me what it was. Just said it might matter one day. I unfolded the page carefully. The heading read, Irrigation Easement Agreement, 1959. My pulse kicked. It was a water rights document, a legal record stating that the Mercer Ranch held primary control over the upstream dam and the irrigation channel branching from it. The wording was dense, but a few lines stood out immediately. The Mercer property retains priority rights to regulate flow and release. Downstream parcels dependent on Mercer-controlled structures must maintain access agreements. Any expansion requiring increased water demand must be reviewed by Mercer ownership. I lifted my eyes from the page. Sheriff, Silver Creek relies on that water. He nodded slowly. They sure do. Bethany's whole development uses runoff from your ridge. That dam feeds their decorative ponds, their landscaping, even part of their drainage system. A tremor ran through the floor as wind slapped the side of the house. She never mentioned this, I said. No, he replied. But she definitely knows. Developers don't build anywhere without learning the water situation. She might have hoped your granddad's old paperwork was lost or forgotten. But it wasn't, I said, feeling a cold, powerful clarity settle inside me. He saved it. He saved everything, the sheriff said quietly. That man loved this land more than he loved his own comfort. Lightning flared through the window, illuminating the papers spread across the table. The old survey, the notes, the Polaroids, and now the irrigation easement. In that flash of light, it looked like the pieces of a puzzle finally locking together. She wanted the land, I said. But she also wanted the water. And she can't get either without a fight, Sheriff Lawson said. The wind roared outside, rattling the windows. He stood, placing a steady hand on my shoulder. Listen, Cole. Bethany will come at you sideways. Legal pressure, bad faith complaints, county strings. You need to be careful, but you also have something she didn't expect. What's that? I asked. His eyes flicked to the old map, the easement, the notes. Leverage. Another gust slammed the house. Dust swirled under the doorframe. Storm's getting worse, House, he said, grabbing his hat. But before I go, one more thing. He paused at the threshold. She's nervous, he said. Nervous enough to start calling in favors. That means you hit a nerve. I'm not backing down, I said. Good, he replied. Because this valley could use someone with a spine. He stepped back into the storm, hat low, coat flapping in the wind. I watched as he climbed into the sheriff's SUV, headlights cutting through the dust like twin spears of light. As he drove away, I looked down at the old irrigation document again. My grandfather wasn't just protecting land, he was protecting the water. And now, whether I wanted it or not, that responsibility was mine. The storm rolled out overnight, leaving behind a sky scrubbed clean and sharp, as if the world had been rinsed in ice water. The pastures glittered faintly with leftover dust, and the smell of damp earth clung to the air. When morning light hit the windows, It felt like the first breath after holding one too long. I stood at the kitchen table, staring at the irrigation easement, the old map, and Luke's notes. They looked almost innocent sitting there. Paper never showed the weight it carried. I needed help, legal help. Not just a sheriff's warning or a neighbor's memories. I needed someone who could read these documents with the precision my grandfather had hoped for. Evelyn knew who I needed. "There's a woman in town," she told me last night over the phone. "Maya Torres. Knows water law better than anyone round here. Some folks don't like her 'cause she doesn't bend to developers. That's exactly why you need her." So I made the call. 2 hours later, an old silver Subaru rolled up the ranch drive, tires crunching on gravel. A woman in her early 30s stepped out. Dark hair pulled back, sunglasses perched on her head, briefcase in hand. She wore jeans, boots, and a flannel shirt rolled to the elbows like she expected to tromp through mud if necessary. "You must be Cole," she said. Evelyn wasn't kidding. "You look like a man who hasn't slept." "Storm kept me up," I said. It wasn't entirely untrue. "Or paperwork?" she asked, eyeing the folder under my arm. I managed a small smile. She was sharp. Inside the house, I spread everything across the table again. For the second time in 2 days, a near stranger studied the pieces of my inheritance like they were clues to a long-buried crime. Maya picked up the irrigation easement first. Her brow furrowed. Her eyes narrowed. She flipped through each page slowly, lips moving as she read legal phrasing older than either of us. Then she exhaled, low and long. "Well," she said, "this is a problem." "For who?" I asked. "For Bethany. For Silver Creek. For anyone who's relying on that water without your permission." She tapped the document with the back of her pen. "This easement gives you priority control over the entire flow from that dam. Any downstream development that could increase water demand or change drainage patterns requires your explicit consent. That includes landscaping, pond features, irrigation systems, everything Silver Creek built their pretty little suburb on." A cold, bright understanding settled in my chest. "So they can't expand without me," I said. "They can't operate without you," Maya corrected. "At least not legally. And if the county approved construction without reviewing this easement, well, somebody made a serious oversight." "Or ignored it," I said. She nodded. "Or ignored it." Her tone suggested she believed the latter. She gathered the rest of the papers, the old map, the letters my grandfather wrote, the Polaroids Luke had taken of boundary markers, and arranged them with unnerving precision. "Cole," she said softly, "your grandfather was trying to build a case. He knew someone was moving lines. He knew someone was pretending this easement didn't exist. He wasn't wrong." I swallowed hard. "He fought alone." "You're not alone," she said. "Not anymore." Something inside me eased. Not much. Not enough to breathe freely, but enough to stand straighter. "So what do we do?" I asked. She leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "We go through the proper channels. We file a formal request for a county review of the subdivision's water impact. That will freeze any new construction immediately, likely for weeks, maybe months. That gives us time. It gives you leverage," she said. "Developers hate delays, investors hate uncertainty, and HOAs hate anything they can't control." Her mouth twitched upward. "Bethany Caldwell is all three of those things wrapped into one." I let the weight of that settle. "Before we file," she added, "I want to see the dam." We hiked up the hill behind the ranch. The morning sun shimmered on the water behind it, reflecting pale gold on the ripples. The air was cool and smelled of wet stone and sagebrush. The small earthen wall stood firm and steady, its spillway trickling with a rhythm as old as my childhood. Maya studied everything: its structure, the flow, the runoff path that snaked down toward Silver Creek. She took notes, photos, measurements with her phone. "This dam is stable," she said finally. "Better maintained than half the ones I've inspected. Your grandfather knew what he was doing." "He built it himself," I said, "with help from a couple ranch hands and too much stubbornness." "That stubbornness means Silver Creek's waterworks depend on this reservoir, and your easement means you get to decide how water flows." I looked down toward the subdivision. The houses glittered in the sun. Rows of bright roofs, green lawns, sprinkler arcs glistening like spun glass. They looked peaceful from up here, but peace built on someone else's land wasn't peace at all. "We need to approach this carefully," Maya continued. "We don't want to hurt the residents. They didn't cause this. Bethany did. The goal is accountability, not chaos." I nodded. "I'm not looking to rip up lawns or cut off water." "No," she said, "but we can force transparency. We can force the truth onto the table." She closed her notebook. "I'll draft the paperwork for the county. It'll go in today." As we walked back toward the house, a dust plume rose from the direction of the Silver Creek access road. Another HOA vehicle, dark blue, same logo as before. It stopped near the ranch fence, and a man stepped out with a camera slung around his neck. He started snapping photos of the pasture, the barn, even the dam behind us. "What's he doing?" I asked. "Documenting," Maya said. "Or pretending to. This is intimidation, Cole. Standard tactic." He noticed us approaching and quickly retreated to the vehicle. The SUV sped off toward the subdivision. "Let them take pictures," Maya said. "They're going to need a lot more than that." When we reached the porch, she placed a hand on my arm. "Cole, you have something rare here. Proof, history, legal leverage, and a community downstream that depends on your water." I met her gaze. "So I'm not powerless." "No," she said. "You're holding the one card Bethany never expected anyone to have." She closed her briefcase. "I'll file the requests by the end of the day. Once the county sees this easement, Silver Creek has to pause every construction plan they've got on the board." "And Bethany?" Maya smiled faintly. "She'll panic." I watched the Silver Creek homes shimmering in the distance, looking suddenly fragile, like a house of cards waiting for the first real wind. My grandfather once told me the valley only makes sense if you understand the water, where it goes, how it moves, who it belongs to. I understood now. The water didn't belong to Silver Creek. It never had. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and a quiet, growing tension that wrapped itself around the ranch like a tightening fence wire. Maya filed her requests with the county first thing the next morning. She sent copies of the easement, Luke's coordinates, and the original map to the county recorder, the planning office, and the state water board. By noon, the rumors began. By nightfall, they were wildfire. Neighbors started calling Evelyn, asking if it was true, if the shiny Silver Creek houses were sitting on stolen land, if their lawns were drinking water they had no legal right to, if the HOA president they trusted had lied through her perfect white smile. On the morning of the fourth day, I stepped outside to find 2 local news vans idling on the road beyond my gate. Reporters leaned against their vehicles, waiting. They didn't approach, not yet. But they were watching. Even the air felt different, like the whole valley was holding its breath. "Today's the day," Maya said when she arrived, setting her briefcase on the hood of her car. "You ready?" I wasn't sure if ready was the word, but I nodded anyway. We weren't hosting the meeting at the clubhouse, not on their turf, not in a glass building that sat half on my land. The truth needed to stand where it belonged, on the open field that had held generations of Mercers before any HOA sign ever sprouted in this valley. Luke met us by the barn with his equipment. He'd printed large foam board maps, layered with the old survey, his GPS data, and a high-resolution satellite image showing exactly where the houses and clubhouse overlapped the Mercer line. Evelyn arrived next, carrying a thermos and her stubbornness. A few minutes later, the residents started coming. They arrived in SUVs, sedans, golf carts, and on foot. Young families with strollers, retirees in sun hats, men in polo shirts and women in workout leggings. Some looked angry, some looked anxious. Others looked like they weren't sure if they should even be here. They gathered in small clusters on the field, murmuring, glancing between the maps and the ranch, their faces reading confusion, worry, and something else. Betrayal. Bethany had created a world where everything was curated and controlled, and now they were standing on open land with no clubhouse walls to hide behind. Good. By the time the crowd reached nearly 100 people, the wind had picked up, carrying the smell of sage and dry earth. The sky was wide and impossibly blue, the kind that made lies look small. Maya stepped forward first. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice steady. "We're here because many of you were never given the truth about the land beneath your homes." A ripple of discomfort passed through the crowd. Luke unrolled a fresh survey map on a portable table. The paper snapped in the wind like a warning flag. "This," he said, pointing to the bold black line, "is the original, legally recorded boundary of Mercer Ranch, confirmed through multiple historical markers and cross-checked coordinates." He placed a transparent overlay on top, the Silver Creek development map. The shift was undeniable. Gasps rose in unison. "Those are our backyards," one woman whispered. "That's my fence line," a man in a fishing hat said, stepping closer with wide eyes. "Is that the clubhouse?" someone else demanded. "Part of it's on their land." Maya nodded. "Based on the evidence, yes." A wave of murmurs swelled. Fear, disbelief, anger. That's when the voice cut through the noise. "This is a farce!" Every head turned. Bethany Caldwell marched across the field like she was leading a parade. Heels sinking into the soft ground, a folder tucked against her chest, eyes flashing with fury. Behind her trailed 2 HOA board members and the same young compliance officer from before. How she managed to look offended and superior at the same time, I would never know. "Mr. Mercer," she said, her tone dripping ice, "you have no authority to call this meeting." "This isn't a meeting," I replied evenly. "It's the truth. You are misleading these homeowners with fabricated maps and fantasy claims," she snapped. "Our survey was approved by the county. Your old papers have no standing." Luke didn't raise his voice. "Ma'am, these are not fantasies. I have 32 confirmed GPS points that align with the 1960s survey. Every marker lines up. Every measurement is consistent. Your development map does not match any recorded historical boundary." "Then the historical boundary must be wrong," she shot back. A man near the front, tall, silver-haired, wearing a golf windbreaker, stepped forward. "Bethany, you told us everything was above board. You said there were no disputes." "There aren't," she said sharply. Another resident spoke up. "But my backyard," she pointed at the map. "That's on Mercer land, isn't it?" "That's meaningless unless proven in court," Bethany insisted. "Oh, we will prove it," Maya said calmly, "which is why I filed for a full county review." Bethany's face went rigid. "What?" she whispered. "You did what?" "The county must examine all water impact and boundary concerns before approving any further development," Maya continued. "Effective immediately, Silver Creek's expansion is frozen." Several residents gasped. A few murmured in shock. Bethany spun toward them. "This is an attack. Mr. Mercer is exploiting outdated paperwork to sabotage this community." I I stepped forward, raising my voice just enough for the crowd to hear without sounding like I was shouting. No, I am protecting what belongs to my family, and what many of you never knew, what my grandfather tried to warn the county about, is that your community was built on a false foundation. You don't know what you're talking about, Bethany barked. What did your file say? A laid-off engineer with no experience in land law. That's true, I said quietly. But do you know what experience I do have? I pointed toward the ridge. Water systems, hydrology, structural flow, and that dam up there, my grandfather's dam, feeds half your landscaping. The pond behind your clubhouse, the water features in your parks. Silence rippled outward like a dropped stone. And this, I said, holding up the old easement, is the legal right that says Silver Creek needed Mercer permission for every drop of that water. Bethany's face drained of color. The crowd erupted. What? Is that real? She didn't tell us that. Our HOA fees pay for water design. Why wouldn't she mention this? Luke folded his arms. Because she didn't think anyone would dig deep enough to find it. I looked at the residents, the parents holding their kids' hands, the retirees frowning at the maps, the young couple whispering worriedly. You folks are not the enemy, I said. You bought homes. You trusted your leadership. The person who created this mess wasn't you. I turned toward Bethany. It was her. For the first time since I met her, she looked rattled, unsteady, her certainty cracking like thin ice. She opened her mouth to lash back, but a woman near the front, middle-aged, wearing a denim jacket, cut her off. If this is true, she said, voice shaking, you lied to us. Bethany sputtered. It's incomplete information at worst. No, another man said. This is fraud. Voices rose. Anger, fear, demands, questions fired at Bethany from every direction. The HOA president, who once commanded rooms with effortless control, now stood small, swallowed by the field she had tried to claim. And all she could do was stammer as the truth closed in. The wind picked up again, rustling the tall grass. The maps on the table flapped loudly, like flags signaling a change in the valley. This was no longer about me. This was about everyone who had been misled. Everyone stuck paying for someone else's deception. And they were no longer looking at me. They were looking at her. The field felt charged, hot, electric, not from the sun, but from the collective weight of realization. The residents who once spoke in gentle HOA-approved tones now let their voices rise, brittle with anger. You said everything was legally cleared. You promised stable property values. You hid this from us, Bethany. Her mouth opened and closed, helplessly fishing for a script she no longer had. The wind whipped across the open land, lifting the corners of Luke's survey maps, tugging strands of her perfect hair loose from their sculpted place. In the distance, a dog barked. A kid cried quietly into her mother's shirt. An older man shook his head like he'd just been punched. This wasn't a meeting anymore. This was a reckoning. I stepped forward, raising my voice just enough to be heard above the chaos. Folks, I said, let me show you exactly what your HOA president didn't. I lifted the irrigation easement document, the one my grandfather had guarded for decades. Its paper was stiff, yellowed, but the signatures and county seals glinted in the sunlight. This, I said, is the legal key to the entire valley. Eyes widened. Conversations died. Even the wind seemed to hush for a breath. Before any of this, before the clubhouse, the pond, the fountains, the manicured lawns, there was the Mercer Ranch. And decades ago, my grandfather built that dam up there with full county permission. I pointed to the ridge where the water shimmered bright against the sky. And with it came this easement. It gives the Mercer family full legal authority over water flow into this valley. Anything that changes demand or drainage, I raised the document a little higher, requires our approval. A collective murmur swept the crowd. A woman in a sun hat frowned hard. "You mean all the water features in our development? Everything?" "Yes," Maya answered calmly, stepping to my side like a second anchor. "They all rely on the Mercer-controlled reservoir. None of it should have moved forward without the family's consent." A man in a polo shirt turned to Bethany. "You knew this, didn't you?" She stiffened. "Those documents are ancient, irrelevant. The county approved new." "The county didn't nullify this," Maya said sharply. "Nothing here was superseded. If this easement had been reviewed, your entire development would have been subject to renegotiation or delay." Bethany flushed. "This is absurd. He's twisting." Luke cut her off with a slow shake of his head. "Ma'am, I've worked 40 years in surveying. Nothing about this looks like a misunderstanding." People started shouting again, louder this time. "I bought my home based on lies. My backyard is on stolen land. Is any of this legal? Are we going to be sued? Are we going to lose our homes?" The panic swelled, and for a moment I saw the valley through Grandpa's eyes. Quiet rolling fields replaced by noise and confusion, and shiny plastic houses built on foundations of manipulation. I held up both hands. "Please, let me speak." Silence fell again, thin and brittle. "I'm not here to punish families," I said. "I'm not here to hurt kids or uproot homeowners. You all bought your houses in good faith. You weren't told the truth." Some heads nodded. Bethany Caldwell made decisions and hid things that no HOA president should hide. But I'm not your enemy. I gestured to the land. This field has seen 3 generations of Mercers work it. And it's still here. I'm not going anywhere. And neither are you. The mood shifted. Just slightly. Enough for people to breathe. "But we can't keep pretending this situation doesn't exist," I continued. "So here's what I'm proposing." Bethany spun toward me, eyes wide. "You can't propose anything. You have no authority in Bethany," I said softly. "You may want to sit down." Gasps rippled through the crowd. She froze, her jaw clenching, hands balling into fists. I faced the residents again and delivered my terms. 1. Every fine, every lien, every fabricated violation levied against the Mercer Ranch is canceled, permanently. Several residents nodded eagerly. That point alone felt like justice to them. 2. Bethany Caldwell steps down as HOA president, immediately, and the board elects someone the community actually trusts. A few claps broke out, small at first, then louder. Bethany's cheeks flushed a dangerous red. "You have no right. I'm not done." The murmurs quieted. 3, I said. The HOA signs a long-term lease for the 10 acres it has built on. A fair lease at fair market rates overseen by the county and reviewed by independent counsel. Gasps again, shock mixed with relief. "And with that lease," I continued, "every family keeps their home. No one gets displaced. No one faces a lawsuit. Everyone gets clarity and stability." The field went still. It felt like the entire development, the entire valley, was waiting for Bethany's response. But she didn't say anything. She just stood there trembling, rage twisting her expression into something unrecognizable. A man near the front turned to her. "Bethany, that's reasonable." Another homeowner echoed him. "This protects us, and it protects the ranch." A younger woman crossed her arms. "If you promised us things you knew weren't true, you need to step down." Finally, an older gentleman spoke, his voice firm. "I vote we accept his terms." For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then another voice. "Seconded." Then a third. Then dozens. A rising tide of agreement surged through the crowd, drowning out the last fragments of Bethany's control. I watched her sway slightly, like the ground had tilted beneath her. "This isn't over," she hissed, but her voice was small, swallowed by the wind. It is, Maya said quietly. For you. The residents began dispersing in clusters, some thanking me, some still shaken but relieved. A few approached Bethany, demanding explanations she could no longer give. She backed away from them, eyes darting, her confidence leaking out of her like water through cracked stone. I stood in the center of the field, feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and triumph swirl in my chest. I hadn't destroyed a community. I'd saved a valley from collapsing under its own lies. And in the process, I'd taken back something my grandfather feared would be lost forever. Our place in this land. I hadn't destroyed a community. I'd saved a valley from collapsing under its own lies. And in the process, I'd taken back something my grandfather feared would be lost forever. Our place in this land. The weeks that followed felt unreal, like watching the valley exhale after holding its breath for years. News traveled fast here, faster than the wind that carried dust from the ridge to the river. Within 3 days of the confrontation on the open field, the HOA board called an emergency meeting. Bethany did not attend. Word was she'd packed up her office that morning, slamming drawers and barking orders at her assistant until her voice gave out. Some residents said she'd been seen loading boxes into a black SUV. One claimed she broke down crying behind the clubhouse. Another insisted she was on the phone threatening county officials until they stopped answering. No one knew what was true. But that evening, when the HOA board cast their vote, the result was unanimous. Bethany Caldwell was removed as HOA president. Her access badges were revoked. Her development privileges suspended pending investigation. And the subdivision she once ruled with polished confidence entered a phase it had never experienced before. Honesty. 2 days later, the county formally acknowledged the oversight regarding the boundary maps and launched an inquiry into the discrepancies in Silver Creek's submitted documents. Construction on Phase 3, which had been planned for the hillside east of the clubhouse, was halted immediately. And the Mercer Ranch? For the first time in a long while, it felt like it could breathe. The official lease paperwork took another week, but once the terms were finalized, the tension in the valley eased even further. The HOA agreed to pay fair compensation for the 10 acres built over the ranch boundary, money that would go directly into preserving the land. The lease would be overseen annually by a neutral third-party evaluator to ensure transparency, exactly as Maya insisted. Residents approached me one by one in the days that followed, some apologizing for their earlier suspicion, others thanking me for not letting the truth tear their community apart. One evening, a young couple walked up the drive holding their toddler. "We just wanted to say, thank you," the woman said. "We had no idea, and you could have ruined us if you wanted." I shook my head. That was never the goal. "We know," the man said, "and that's why we're grateful." Life settled, slowly, into a new kind of rhythm. The mornings grew cooler, the summer heat giving way to crisp air that smelled like pine and riverstone. I found myself waking earlier, sometimes before sunrise, drawn outside by instinct. I'd walk the ridge where the dam stood, checking the spillway, watching the first hints of dawn turn the valley gold. The water shimmered, calm and steady, as if it knew it had been claimed again by hands that respected it. One afternoon, Maya and Sheriff Lawson drove up to the ranch with paperwork from the county. We sat on the porch, the wood warm under our boots, as they walked me through each page. "The inquiry into the surveys is ongoing," Maya said. "It'll take time. But from what we're seeing, the development firm altered more than just your boundary." The sheriff crossed his arms. "And other ranch owners might have been pressured too. You started something bigger than you realized, son." I wasn't sure how to respond. I wasn't looking to be a symbol, just a man defending what was his. but maybe sometimes defending your own land helps others defend theirs too. Later that week, Evelyn came by with a tin of cornbread and enough attitude to knock a fence post straight. She sat in Grandpa's old chair on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the hills with narrowed eyes. "Your granddad would be proud," she said quietly. The words caught something deep in my chest. "Think so?" I asked. She nodded toward the barn, the dam, the fields. "You didn't let them wipe his name off this land. That means something." A long silence settled between us, comfortable, like the hush that comes after a prayer. As fall edged into the valley, I began planning something new, something that had been growing in my mind since the day I found Grandpa's old journals. He'd written about wanting to teach local kids about ranching, water management, conservation, things the valley depended on but rarely acknowledged. So I cleaned out the barn. I fixed the windows, patched the roof, swept out years of dust. I set up tables, brought in equipment he once used to measure water flow, and installed new lighting that still kept the rustic feel of the place. I added a small sitting area with books on soil, irrigation, ecology, and Western history. By the time the first frost touched the grass, the barn wasn't a barn anymore. It was an education center, the Carson Mercer Agricultural Learning Center. Kids from town visited with their teachers, crowding around the dam with notebooks, asking questions about irrigation and water rights, and how ranchers worked the land without harming it. Some asked about Silver Creek, how it happened, what it meant. I told them the truth, not to scare them, but because land only holds meaning if people understand its story. One morning I hung a wooden sign beside the barn door, a quote Grandpa wrote in his journal decades ago. "Never underestimate the power of a good map and an honest man." The words felt right here, anchored, permanent. As winter crept close, Maya and the sheriff visited more often. Luke stopped by with updated survey prints. Even some of the Silver Creek residents came to volunteer, helping build walking paths and garden plots for local school programs. Bethany didn't come back. They said she moved out of the county entirely. The development firm cut ties with her. State investigators were reviewing several of her past projects. Whatever empire she'd tried to build on my land had crumbled to dust. And I was still here. Still walking the fields at dawn. Still checking the dam spillway. Still carrying on something my grandfather started long before I was old enough to recognize its worth. One evening, after a long day prepping the barn for winter classes, I stood at the porch and looked out over the valley. The sunset lit the hills on fire, orange, red, gold, painting the land like it was alive. Maya joined me, leaning on the railing. "You did good, Cole." "I just followed the evidence," I said. She smiled. "Plenty of people would have run from this fight." I shook my head, watching the last light stretch across the water. "This land raised me," I said softly. I wasn't about to walk away. A quiet breeze swept across the fields, carrying the smell of pine and cold night air. For the first time since returning to Wyoming, I felt something settle inside me, not just victory, but belonging. Grandpa hadn't left me a burden. He'd left me a legacy. And now, finally, it was safe. If you've ever had to stand your ground for what's right, drop a yes in the comments. I read every one. Out here, the land teaches you that justice only comes to folks who refuse to back down. And if you'd like to hear more true, slow-burn stories of ranchers, neighbors, and ordinary people fighting back the right way, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be right here, waiting on the porch for the next story.